Joining us now is Jeff Stein of the Washington Post, great friend of the show, to talk about his latest reporting and some of the developments on Trump's tariffs. Good to see you, Jeff. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, my pleasure. Always happy to be on. Thanks.
All right. So Secretary Scott Bessant, seemingly the, quote, voice of reason, at least according to Wall Street, in the room, giving some new comments about how he wants to be clear that America first does not mean America alone. A little bit different than some of the things he said previously. Let's take a listen, and we're going to get your reaction.
This morning, I will explain how they can provide that leadership to build safer, stronger, and more prosperous economies all around the world. I wish to invite my international counterparts to join us in working toward these goals. On this point, I wish to be clear. America first does not mean America alone. To the contrary, it is a call for deeper collaboration and mutual respect among trade partners. Far from stepping back, America First seeks to expand U.S. leadership in international institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. By embracing a stronger leadership role, America First seeks to restore fairness to the international economic system.
So, Jeff, what do you make of those comments in the wake of, reciprocal, unilateral tariffs put upon the entire world, taken off, the posture through which this has all happened in some pretty acrimonious negotiations? How does that fit with a lot of the reporting that you have from behind the scenes?
I thought it was funny that the Secretary used that phrase because Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, definitely no MAGA person, in 2021 said, quote, America first must not mean America alone, which is almost exactly what the current Treasury Secretary said. I don't know if they realized that they had, said something almost exactly what their predecessor had said, or if it was just a coincidence. I think, to your point, there have been a number of very high-profile fights in the last sort of 2 or 3 weeks over the scope of the tariff policy. And whereas previously, Peter Navarro, who is the, uber hawk who wants more and more and more confrontation, more and more trade barriers, more conflict with our international economic allies, was initially sort of carrying the day in the initial round of tariff debates. Bessant is actually sort of on the ascendant, and you can really see that in sort of the tone and the message he's conveying there, which is so contrary to the actions that the White House was taking just a few weeks ago. I mean, we imposed unilateral tariffs on every country, essentially, dozens and dozens of countries, over 70, I think, was the final number. And Bessant here is trying to communicate that, that is not necessarily the way of the future, that what Navarro's success was in the early days of this trade war may not last forever. Of course, the problems we can discuss is that Navarro, that's uber hawk, right next to Trump at all times, is still, just a breath away from power, in the sense that, anytime Trump wants him or is feeling a impulse to hit another country with high tariffs, he can just call Peter or just invite him into the Oval. And so there's a real dissonance here between the messages from Navarro and the messages from Bessant. Bessant, as all the sort of palace intrigue reporting shows, and as our reporting shows as well, has had the upper hand in a range of sort of policy debates in the last couple of weeks. And so I think that's being reflected in this public communication as well, where he's feeling emboldened to say things like the clip you played.
Got it.
Yeah. I mean, it's hilarious after not only the way they've approached the trade war. I mean, a few weeks ago, Trump said something like, we shouldn't even have supply lines, right? Like literally everything. We're going to have like this North Korea style, fully autarkic economy. And you have not only that, you've got threatening war against Denmark and Canada and Mexico and Iran and all these countries around the world. J.D. Vance going to Europe and lecturing them about free speech, and then, coming here and cracking down on college students who dare to say anything that they don't like about Israel. So you've had this incredibly adversarial approach around the world. And that rhetoric is still coming from Trump in a lot of ways. I mean, just yesterday evening, he did this, Oval Office press avail and was still calling Trudeau the governor of Canada. We can go ahead and take a listen to a little bit of that.
Trudeau, who I call Governor Trudeau affectionately, but I asked him, why are we spending $200 billion to support Canada, to subsidize Canada? And he was unable to answer the question. I mean, why are we doing that? And I have to be honest, as a state, it works great. As a nation, considering the fact that most of the nation, 95% of Canada, what they do is they buy from us and they sell to us. They sell to us. If we didn't buy their oil, and we don't need their oil. We have more oil than anyone, but we don't need their oil. We don't need their lumber. We don't need their cars. We don't need anything. So I said, why are we doing this? Why are we spending $200 billion? It doesn't make sense.
So you still have Trump saying things like that. You also, I just saw Japan says, hey, we're not going to be part of any trade bloc that seeks to isolate China because our trade with China is too important. So in some ways, even if Bessant is, in the driver's seat right now, I feel like the damage is already done with the way that this administration has conducted itself, globally, and also with the type of rhetoric that Trump still embraces and still clearly is like where his heart actually is at.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fundamental problem for them here in some ways is Bessant and to some degree Trump have clearly been totally spooked by what happened, not really even primarily in the stock market, but what happened in the bond market, which threatened to raise borrowing costs for tens of millions of Americans, a sudden economic shock, which would be sort of visible and devastating and immediate. And for Bessant, clearly the goal of the last few weeks after the Liberation Day tariffs has been to turn down the temperature, to kind of get people to sort of like step back from the brink, to relax a little bit so we can get some breathing room for the economy, because he will be blamed if this is the most catastrophic self-inflicted economic leadership in American history, which if the U.S. just drove off the cliff into a recession, many people would, legitimately say they had done. But remember, obviously, that Trump's entire sort of worldview is that you need to maintain maximal leverage over other people at all times. That is how you get what you want. You sort of cajole them, you insult them, you make them think that you're kind of crazy and who knows what you're going to do next. So it's this brinksmanship that is, core to what Donald Trump has been saying about human nature, really, like about the fundamental relations between people for decades. And Bessant's goal of turning down the temperature is just fundamentally incompatible with Trump's strategy of maintaining maximal brinksmanship through this style that you were alluding to. And it produces this, as I said, extreme dissonance between the president and his top economic advisor. I met yesterday with the head of the economic team for a foreign country, and it's the kind of meeting, like as a reporter, you're like excited to like hear what they're hearing, like what message are they getting from Treasury or Commerce or the White House, and then I can use that to like report on what's happening. And like I get to the meeting, and instead of them telling like me like what they're hearing, all they want to do is ask me what I'm hearing, and they're asking me like, when can we get a deal? And I'm like, no, I asked you that question. Like, you're supposed to tell me. And it reflects, like, the fact that nobody knows. Like, even I get the sense that the Trump people, like, don't themselves know exactly what the president wants. And in the absence of that knowledge, it's really, really hard to, like, prevent an economic collapse because, I mean, I don't want to be too dramatic here, but, like, there are real risks that the uncertainty that they're causing will push us into a recession where a lot of people get hurt. And even if that doesn't happen, it seems quite clear that they're raising the risks.
Jeff, at the same time, one of the more maximal things that Trump had signaled was that he was going to fire Jerome Powell. You, though, let's put A8, please, up on the screen. You have some reporting from behind the scenes about how some of his top aides told him to tone down the attacks on Powell. He seems to have listened. He said, okay, I'm not going to fire him. I never had any plans to do so. So what's going on behind that? Because I feel like his decision-making around the Fed is important for us trying to at least understand his mindset with respect to tariffs or any of these other big things that he says.
Yeah, it's a tricky story because, for months I've been hearing, that people who were talking to Trump or talking to people who were close to Trump, that he's been sort of saying, like, Powell, we should get rid of him. I don't really like what he's doing. And it's really hard to gauge the seriousness of that because, Trump just like kind of grousing about how he doesn't like what Powell's up to is really different than like drawing up the plans and like hitting the big red button. What is clear is that over the last, or I guess on Monday, the Wall Street Journal reported on the rumors that we've been hearing as well for a long time, which is that Trump was talking about this. And in response to that Wall Street Journal story, the markets tanked. And so after that, as that process was unfolding, the people who have been most concerned about the markets within the administration, maybe not necessarily the most concerned, but among the most concerned, Treasury Secretary Bessant and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick went to the president and said, we don't think that this might even be legal. So Trump could fire Powell, but then he could still remain there. So you would kind of get the worst of both worlds, and that the market, would be really destabilized. I think the way someone put it to me was basically that, if you fire Powell, Mr. President, like, we cannot maintain all of these fights simultaneously. Like, let's pick our battles a little bit. Powell's going to be gone anyway, I think, in late 2026. So just hold off on that for now. Doesn't mean that Trump wasn't sort of grousing about the potential, but that suggests, as you're suggesting, Saagar, that there's a recognition here that they can't be fighting all battles simultaneously at all times. I guess that was redundant, but that there's a limit to how much they can fight. And I feel like that, is a comforting thing, but how much have they already done? How much is this genie out of the bottle? I don't know if you guys have been seeing some of the shipping data, shipment bookings down 60% between the US and China, consumer confidence now at its second lowest level in the last 1952. So we're in this weird place right now where the hard economic data, jobs and inflation and GDP are still looking totally fine for the most part. But it's this like soft data that measures that's sort of like more real in real time, but is not as macro and sweeping that is flashing red. And I think the White House is very aware of that.
Yeah. I mean, what is your assessment of that, Jeff? How much, even if this is something Saagar and I were just talking about, even if they back away from everything now, how much damage has already been done? I've seen the comparison, Joe Weisenthal and others making the comparison to basically like the COVID disruptions that led to inflation, that led to shortages, that took so long to untangle. It's not like you can just snap your fingers and unsnarl all of these things.
Yeah, I've been trying to like refer to it as the Wile E. Coyote economy, in the sense that like we've run off a cliff and we have not looked down yet. Like, we just don't know what is beneath us, because as I was sort of trying to say, like, the most important economic data is pretty delayed, which is frustrating for, reporters to get a good sense of what's happening. I think, there are reasons to think, that it won't be, nearly as bad as 2008 or 2020. Trade is hugely important to the U.S. economy, but it's, 15% of the economy is imports. You double it, another 15% is exports. That's 25%. Most of the tariffs on other countries have been pulled back, but it's really the China question that is the most significant right now. Then again, they've exempted electronics, so maybe that will sort of bail them out a little bit. We have a story I scooped this morning about rare earth metals, which don't ask me to name them because I couldn't, but they're sort of crucial component parts for semis and the defense industry and a huge range of healthcare functions. Companies are telling us that they're on sort of their last reserve the next month or so, and China has cut those off. That China has essentially a chokehold on these rare earths, or rather the processing of these rare earths, but just as well might as well be the production of them. And that choke point by China is a really, really serious potential blow to the U.S. economy, which the Chinese know and are full well exploiting. So I think given some of the softer tone from Trump in the last few days, it is quite likely that the White House is looking at economic data that is really not good. It's a cliche, but like economics is extremely psychological. If I think that you're not making a purchase, then I'm going to wait for the price to go down, which means I'm not buying, which means the guy across the street will also not buy because he'll wait for the price to come down. And that's pretty soon how you have a really serious downturn.
Yep. Man, grim stuff, but we always appreciate your reporting, Jeff. Thank you.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.